Hello guys, and welcome back to Scale Down Customs. This session's project is going to be Revell's Porsche Panamera Turbo. So let's open her up and see what we got. Got some nice low profile tires here. Those look very nice. Nice tread pattern on the side. Chrome looks really good. Not too shiny. That looks really good actually. The glass looks nice. We've got some fogged edges that we can mask up easily. Those look good. The body is molded in blue plastic. We'll be painting it a different color. So it looks like separately molded door handles. I always like when the mirrors have a little bit of a knob on there to give it some more bite to glue to the doors. Good, nice detail on that. Chassis, nice detail. It's got a little bit of a texture on it. That'll finish out nicely, I think. Some nice disc brakes with the slotted rotors. Calipers are attached to it. Nice detail. Engine looks great. A lot of fine detail on that. Very nice. Go to the interior. Just the bottom part of the seats are molded in. Center console is molded in. Partial shelf. That's going to be interesting. We'll see what we're going to do with the interior. I'm not sure what color we're going to do that yet. So nice bucket seats with the seat backs on there. Nice dash, the rear seats. Very detailed door panels. Center console with a lot of separate buttons and stuff. That's nice. Very detailed steering wheel. A lot of detail on this kit. I like it. So the right hand or the left hand drive, just a lot more detail. Paddle shifters, armrests for the doors. Very nice. A lot of very good detail on this. I'm excited about this kit. And again, the body is molded in blue plastic, but we'll be painting it a different color. Panel lines look good and crisp, but we'll be making those a little bit deeper. Engine bay has some nice detail on that. Mold lines aren't too bad on this one. Those will sand down pretty smooth, I think. Very detailed body. Interior, the headliner. All right, let's get to work. Oh yeah, and the instructions, we'll look at that just a little bit. Very crisp decals, very nice. Center console, the nav screens, a lot of different license plate options. Porsche logos. Yeah, that's looking very nice. What is this? Safety advice. Oh, yep, that's important. Nice colored instruction booklet. Kind of gives you a readout of what the different pictures and indicators mean, what the different icons mean, the color callouts. Gives you your parts tree listing. Wow, even the instructions are in color. I really like when they do this. It gives you a really good idea of the different colors to put on the different parts, like the brake calipers. Things like that. I really like these instruction booklets that Revell's been doing lately. Outstanding. Yeah, these look really good. Decal placement. They're different color plus they're different icons to give you a little bit more of a visual reference of what you're doing, what type of instruction they're giving you. Yes, I really like the way Revell's been doing these instruction booklets lately. Very nice. Placement on things, different colors. Yeah, this is very nice. All right, now let's get to work. So to start off, I like to address the body. So I like to address the mold lines and just get the body cleaned up and ready for primer. While I was sanding down the car, I noticed a couple of dimples, so I just filled those in with some body filler. You can use whatever body filler you choose. Some people use super glue as well, that works. But if you'll notice, sometimes you'll have dimples in different areas, and if you'll notice, if you look on the underside, you'll see some corresponding spots where the plastic is thick. Usually it's like a mounting point, or you'll notice these ribs here. There were some divots there. Those ones were small enough I could just sand those out. Anyway, so I just filled those in, and we'll sand those down and keep getting the body ready for primer. So I'm just going to use a jeweler's file just to kind of smooth it off a little bit. One thing with the sanding sponges is they'll kind of conform. So a lot of times you won't get a flat sand. So you use a flat file, just a jeweler's file, to kind of smooth that off, give you more of a flat finish, and then finish it up with some sandpaper. And one of the other things that we want to address is our ejection pin marks, which you'll see on the headliner here. The thing about the ejection pin marks is, if you're just building for you, great, fine, leave them if you want. If you're building a car to enter in a competition or any kind of judging, you're going to want to take these pin marks off everywhere that they could be visible, because judges are going to look for that. Trademark logos, things like that. You're going to want to take all that stuff off. So to help us take off those ejection pin marks, we're going to use our Tamiya engraving tool. I use this for my panel line scribing. It's got a couple of different thicknesses that you can get. This is a very handy tool. And it also comes with a chisel blade, which is specifically designed for ejection pin marks. And this tool, like I said, is very, very handy. So we'll see if we can't take some of these off. All right, so we've got our ejection pin marks taken care of, but you can see there's some scratches and grooves from the chisel blade that kind of dug in there a little bit too deep. That's going to happen. So what we're going to do is we're going to fill that in with our Mr. Surface. No, that's Tamiya liquid primer. Where's my... There we go. Mr. Surface primer. This is our 500, so this is a little bit thicker than just like regular primer. All right, so you want to kind of put that on there pretty thick, because as it dries, it'll kind of shrink down. So we'll probably end up putting 2 coats on that at a minimum. Once it starts drying, you'll see it shrink down, and if you can see some of the lines, go ahead and put some more, another coat on there, dab it on there kind of thick, let it dry down, and then you can sand it off, and that usually takes care of those pretty well. I'm pretty impressed that there's no ejection pin marks on the underside of the hood. There almost always is, and they're kind of tough to get out because sometimes it'll interfere with a lot of the detail on there. But that's pretty impressive that there's absolutely 0 ejection pin marks under here. Good job, Revell. So while that surface primer is setting up, let's work on some panel line scribing. We'll use the medium blade. I think it's a number 2. All right, because this one's so shallow and my blade's kind of wandering, you can see I've got, well, I don't know if you can, it's going to be really tough, but I've got a big scratch there where I slipped off, and then it's really wavy. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start over with this panel line. All right, so, and then to start over, I'm just going to fill this in and then tape it up, and we'll start over again. Alright, we've got our panel line scribed out, looking a lot better, a lot deeper. Some of them were barely even visible, like around the gas filler cap. So as I go through and I make a mistake and I scrape along the body, I'll just kind of mark it with my Sharpie so that I know where it is and I can come back to it and fill it in. So as you can see, I've got a few little little scrapes and scratches that I need to clean up. So we'll go ahead and do that and just keep moving along. All right, again, we'll be using our Mr. Surface 500. And if you get a scrape that's right, usually, obviously, you'll be scribing your panel line and you'll kind of veer off. So there'll be a scrape right up to your panel line. If that happens, don't worry about it. We can go ahead and fill our scrape, and then if we need to, while it's still wet, we just go through and then just make sure we just wipe out any of the filler from our seam. And that way it'll give us a good seam again. All right, so I'm gonna go do that. I'm gonna go get all these mistakes cleaned up. All right, we're gonna let all my mistakes heal up, dry up for a second, and I'm sure we'll have to put a second coat on there before we sand them down. So we'll let that dry up and get our second coat on there later. So I went ahead and got everything sanded down, thinking I was gonna need to put another coat on there, but it actually looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go take this over to the sink and get all my parts washed off. Get everything cleaned up and ready to move on to primer. All right, back from the sink. I've got all my parts cleaned up, washed off, got that mold release agent washed off of there. So the body's looking pretty good. Before I put primer on it though, I want to make a little bit more use of my time in the spray booth. So I'm gonna put some of these pieces together that call out to be the same color. So we'll be assembling the engine and then some of these seat backs. They're going to be the same color, so that way I can get them off the sprues and get the mold lines and the seams cleaned up and ready for primer. So we'll start doing that. So you'll notice I have a glove on my left hand. I'm right-handed, so most of my work I do with my right hand, which means most of my holding is done with my left hand. So now that I've got my parts cleaned up, I want to keep them as contaminant free as possible. So a couple of tools I'll be using. I'm going to be using my sprue cutters. These are from Tamiya. And then just my regular trusty number 11 hobby knife and some various sanding sticks and sanding sponges from Tamiya and things like that. So let's get started. So let's go over some of the glues that I use most of the time. So this is the Tamiya extra thin cement. I use this a lot. This is actually not a glue, it's a cement, it's a welding agent. What it does is it actually melts the plastic together and creates a permanent bond. So this will not work on any parts, plastic parts that you have painted. If it's got primer or paint on it, this will not work. So if you do have primer or paint on your contact surfaces, you're going to want to scrape that away down to the plastic, and then this will work fine. The other two super glues that I use, this is just regular super glue. There's thick, thin, medium. Use this a lot. And then this is the odorless Super Gold Plus that's actually clear parts safe. So you can use this on your glass if you want to. We're going to use our extra thin cement because I prefer to use this glue when I can because it, like I said, it creates a permanent bond. So that the parts will not come apart once they're glued. And this actually, because it's extra thin, it works by capillary action, which means you can just basically touch a little bit on the seam and it will kind of flow down the rest of the seam. And a lot of it you won't even see, it'll do it just in the gap itself. And then I'll just use some hobby clamps to kind of hold that together while it cement sets up. All right, so I'm going to go through and like I said, I'm not going to show you the same process on every single part. It gets a little tedious, but you get the general idea. Everything that comes off the sprue, like I said, gets cleaned up, glued together if it's the same color, like the seats and the seat backs, they're usually the same color. Some of the engine components, they can go together before paint. They're the same color. The rest of them I'll have to take off and clean up separately and get those painted up separately. So let's let these dry up and then we'll keep moving. All right, I got all my parts cut off the sprue and cleaned up and then attached to these handy, these are just alligator clips that I glued to hobby sticks, and these work really good for holding my parts to get them painted up. So let's head up to the spray booth and get some of these primed. All right, so we got first couple coats of primer on there, some of those things. Most of the styrene was molded in gray, as you saw, so a lot of the gray primer I used, it was a little hard to see how it was going on, so some of it I switched to black, like on the engine. I wanted to do black anyway because it gives me some recessed shadows when I paint it up on a different color on top of it. So I want to sand some of this down, especially my body. So this is an optional step. You don't have to do this. But I've noticed that, especially on a lot of these seams, they'll be raised up a little bit, and even the roof line and stuff, it looks pretty flat now, but I'm going to use this primer as a guide coat, and we're actually going to do a lot of sanding, probably sand a lot of this back down to the plastic, just to get everything as smooth as possible. We're going to be doing a lot of wet sanding too. So this is a 3000 grit sanding sponge from Tamiya. All right, so we got her all sanded down. the hood as well. And you can see, so this is why I do that, just some of the high and low spots, like around some of the seam lines and stuff. The spoiler, you'll see a little bit more of the low spots. That's looking really, really good. So let's go get another coat of primer on there and be ready for some paint. So while I'm talking about primer, a couple of different primers that I've used in the past. I've used the rattle can primers. I tend to use too much when I do the rattle cans, so I started using the Tamiya's liquid surface primer. I thinned this down with the Tamiya thinners, probably about 1:1. This is really good stuff. I've used that for a long time. But lately I've been using the Stynylrez primer. This is made by Badger Airbrush Company. This is a water-based acrylic primer. It goes on really well. It likes to go on thick so it can level out. But this is really forgiving, really good primer that I've been using lately. And this is what I used on the Porsche as well. So one of the other things I like about this primer is, if you watched my how to strip paint off a model car video, that was actually primed with the Tamiya liquid surface primer, and it took a lot longer for it to come off, and a lot of it didn't even come off. So this stuff binds really, really well to the plastic. Whereas this, if I make a mistake, I can soak that in the alcohol and this will come right up underneath the paint even, and comes off really, really well. So if you're accident prone like me, sometimes this this primer works a little bit better. All right, so I'm gonna go get another coat of primer on this, and then we'll be ready to start painting some parts.